So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Twisina Emmanuel Brown. I'm going to be moderating this event. I'm standing in for one of the original moderators who couldn't be here from the World Council of Churches. This session is about religious communities, and it is affirming people around the world. It follows the same format that most signed events will have, which is we're going to open it up to one of our colleagues to say some opening remarks. Then we're going to follow the format of the panelists being asked questions. They're going to testify and do their interventions on behalf of their communities. And then if we have some time towards the end, there are some statements from some very important sponsors that help put this event together. And also after that, we're going to then open it to the floor. Hopefully we will have some questions. Can I remind everybody that although this is a non-secular space at the United Nations, it is sacred to all of us here, for us who are human rights activists, right? So can we all please respect the fact that we're in the United Nations, and this is the fight that we all have is collectively we are all fighting for the progression of human rights for everybody, irrespective of where they come from or the color of their skin and their socioeconomic status. Without further ado, I'm going to now call on, as is typical with spaces that we need to open, I'm going to call on Reverend Nokuthula Dladala. She is a pastor of the House of Prayer and Worship, an inclusive church in Soweto, South Africa, and Reverend Nokuthula is going to open this space with a few words of prayer. So, ladies and gentlemen, Reverend Nokuthula.
Hi, everyone. I acknowledge that this is an interfaith space. We're from different faith, as people of faith, from different faith background. So I'll allow us to do what feels right for you, what feels comfortable, whether you close your eyes, whether you do whatever that makes you express how your faith. Let us pray. God, who is called by many names in the different language, we thank you for this time as we begin this important conversation. We pray for your peace, for your strength, and for your wisdom as we begin this journey. In many names we pray. Amen.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Nokuthula. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to remind everybody that this event is Facebook Live. So if you have a problem with your identity being broadcast on Facebook, it's on the Global Interfaith Network's Facebook page. Please let me know, and then we'll try and accommodate you in a separate part of the room so that you can be seated elsewhere. The format is going to be, I'm going to ask some questions of the panel, then there's going to be a summary, and then there's going to be a question and answer at the end. But first of all, I want to acknowledge the major sponsors that are responsible for bringing this event together. The government of Uruguay and the government of Canada. We want to give our sincere thanks for making sure that this event is happening right here. So thank you very much, Canada and Uruguay. I want to also acknowledge our organizational sponsors. These are the organizational entities that have been able to throw their support behind ensuring that the activists and the faith leaders and faith workers that are on our panel today are able to attend this event. So ACT Alliance, Article 19, ASEAN Sogi Caucus, the Coalition for Sexual and Bodily Rights in Muslim Countries, Franciscans International, Free, Jinsogi, ILGA World, Muslims for Progressive Values, RFSL, and RFSU. And if I've missed anybody, I sincerely apologize, and it will be on the Facebook statement later. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to introduce our... Do you want the panels first? Oh. I'm going to introduce somebody who is very close to the movement. I'm going to invite him to come and give the opening remarks for this side event. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give you Andre du Plessis, the Executive Director of ILGA World.
Thank you, Imania. We're here today in a secular space, the seat of the United Nations Human Rights Council, which is committed to upholding the fundamental principle that human beings, in our fantastic and very complicated diversity, that we are all born free and equal in dignity and rights. Human rights is not the only framing under which peoples of the world understand that all are equal, included, respected, and loved. At their core, faith and religion are another one of those places where this message is, or at least should be, and I think we can all attest to the should there, should be preached and hopefully also practiced as a universal truth. And yet, despite inclusion and love and universally at the core of being human, mentioning the letters L, G, B, T, Q, I, etc., can send both diplomats and theologians into quivers of nervousness, into fraught and calculated strategies of exclusion and of complicated defensive and offensive tactics. Are we LGBTQ people really that scary? I wonder if too often we have stopped talking about the people. We speak of abstract isms rather than real individuals and communities. And I'm so glad that today we will hear from persons of faith from real communities who will share with us some of their joyful and challenging journeys on engaging with questions and people of diverse sexual orientations, gender identities and expressions, and sex characteristics. An inclusive faith perspective on sexuality and gender can be a profoundly beautiful space that we can all learn from in how we have discussions, even here at the United Nations. If held respectfully and honestly, they can collectively take us to our deepest core as humans, where we face some of our own most intimate existence, perhaps feeling naked, exposed and vulnerable in front of others, ourselves, and also God. This space is an odd gift in its very vulnerability, a place that challenges us to be fully open and to love with all our heart and our soul and our mind and our bodies. Sexuality, gender identity, for some, even to speak or hear of these things may provoke embarrassment, awkwardness, guilt. But we must listen to the stories that must be shared. We need to hear perspectives that are different from our own, and especially from those who are voiceless, marginalized, or silenced. And we must enter into ever more respectful and challenging dialogue. For people of faith are compelled by love to communicate with those that we find different. For such listening to be truly respectful, it is necessary to momentarily perhaps suspend judgment. To listen respectfully is in itself an act of acceptance. It may, in fact, be the first step towards the creation of a truly inclusive community. I invite you to do that today, all of you. So yes, here today, this is, of course, a secular space, but I think you know already that it is also a sacred space as we listen and as we learn. I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Andre. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our esteemed panelists and speakers this afternoon. I'm going to start from my right. Ladies and gentlemen, Bokra Belhaj Hamida. Boshra Belhaj Hamida, Member of Parliament of Tunisia and President of the Commission on Individual Freedoms and Equality. Ankit Guptani is a gay rights activist from Mumbai, founder of Queer Hindu Alliance, and is working on inclusivity in classrooms, workplace, and faith. And then we have the Reverend Dr. Brent Hawkes, former pastor of the Metropolitan Community of Toronto, Executive Director of the Rainbow Faith and Freedom Movement, an LGBTIQ activist, and is based in Canada. We have Yulia Dewey Adrianti, queer woman, involved in different projects on interfaith, youth, and queer, and is based in Indonesia. We have Reverend Noktula Daladala, pastor of the House of Prayer and Worship, an inclusive church in Soweto, South Africa, and also working on a project with lesbians and gender non-conforming individuals called Ashes to Purposes, and is also a global ambassador for the Global Interfaith Network. And last but not least, we have Father Thomas Ninan, priest of the Indian Orthodox Church, working for the National Council of Churches in India as part of the Ishar project, which engages churches and theological colleges on inclusivity in respect to sexuality and gender identity. So on behalf of everybody here, a very warm welcome to our panelists and our speakers this afternoon. If I may, I'm going to be asking each of our panelists 3 questions. And then at the end of the 3 questions, there will be a summary or final thoughts where you can summarize if something has been missed. So I'm going to start off with probably from down that end with Father Thomas Ninan. But I also want to remind the audience that amongst our panelists, it's not just faith leaders, it's also faith workers and also individuals who are working in the political space. So you'll be hearing a mixture of messages, not just about faith, but also some messages around the political space from Boshua as well. So Father Thomas, the first of the 3 questions is, so you're a person of faith. You're a faith leader, and faith and sexuality, as we all know, is a very combustible and explosive mix. So the question is, how did you arrive at this moment in your life as a faith leader, working with people of different sexual orientation and gender identity?
I used to be homophobic in my approach towards sexual orientation, same-sex orientations, till the year 2009. In fact, I even teach the youth of our church the so-called biblical understanding about sexual orientation, and hardly realizing that I was actually influencing the youth of my church to be homophobic. Till the time that I moved from India to South Africa for a brief period where I got to do my further studies, I had friends who were from the gay community. I had an opportunity to revisit some of the biblical passages which are judgmental, and to go through a process where I realized that what it would mean to love truly. Is sexual orientation something so big a hurdle to realize the love of God between 2 people? And that was a unique life changer in my life, to not just look at biblical passages, but to go through a life experience of living relationships with people from diverse sexualities. But then that was South Africa. I was coming back to India. And I hardly realized that, this is not an issue in India. This was 2013. So I left all that I learned, the sort of notes, to reduce the baggage to India, saying, I'm not going to face this again. But then God had different plans. And sooner I got an opportunity to serve the National Council of Churches in India, which had a project which engages churches and theological colleges in the area of human sexuality and gender identities. So it was a unique opportunity for me to be able to engage with realities in India, very different from the other places in the world, and to go back to my own journey where I used to be phobic, and now here I am belonging to a church which is very conservative. But internally I had theologically found the Orthodox theology of Trinity to be very connecting to the whole idea of inclusivity. So those were the affirming moments for me as I journeyed in this process of human sexuality, and here I am. So that's been a living experience for me, and I'm so proud and glad to represent that journey here with all of you. Thank you.
So I want to thank Father Thomas as an ally of our movement, right, of our LGBTI movement. But I want to move, maybe perhaps we could look at Reverend Nokuthula Daladala, and if you can please talk a little bit about, your own journey and your personal journey in terms of how did you arrive as a reverend, as an ordained minister now, in your church and in your faith, now at this moment in your life here in Geneva.
Thank you. I grew up in a Christian home. I was baptized when I was 14, and my baptism has a story on its own. But I will save it for another time, since I could not bribe my other panelists to borrow me their time. During that time, I also discovered something about my sexuality that was confusing, and I couldn't share it with anyone because the church was preaching against it. So it was my little secret. When I turned 18, by default, the church that I grew up found out about my secret, that I love girls. To cut the story short, I was told I was demonic, a bad influence. I was a danger to women. Women must stay away from me because what I have was transferable. And during that time, I was also prayed for many months to chase the demons away from me. But that experience had some, it's another story for another time. I was not changing. I also went through a process personally because at some point I also believed that there must be something wrong with me because now everyone is saying that there's something wrong with me. I also believed it and internalized it in the sense that I thought God really didn't love me and I was not created by God. And as I continue battling in my journey, trying to integrate my own sexuality and spirituality, something happens to me that I was gang raped, and people in the church plainly told me that God was punishing me as I was not willing to change. That was very hurtful and led me to try at some point to commit suicide because I didn't understand this kind of God who punishes people. But I didn't die, so I'm not a ghost as you see me today. I was given a second chance, I believe, to do the work that I do today because at that moment in my life, I also had to make a decision to divorce this God who who punishes people, and find the God that was loving and kind, and the God who created me and every one of us. That is how I arrived at this moment in my life as a faith leader. I think through my own lived experience, like it was a journey and a half, but I'm grateful that this journey led me into being who I am today, being openly and being vocal about how we can be able to integrate, how we are all created in the image of God. So I'm grateful for this time, that this is the moment in my life that I am very positive and very excited that through the journey that I had to travel, I find myself here. And I'm grateful that I was here and I'm able to do the work that I am doing today.
Thank you so much for that, Reverend Nothula. My heart breaks every time I hear a story of a woman who was correctively raped and punished because of who she is, in the name of faith. In the name of faith. I want to move to Yulia Andrianti. As a queer woman, Yulia, involved in different projects with interfaith youth and queer based in Indonesia. Are you able to tell us a little bit about your journey and how you've arrived here as a leader and working in your communities?
Okay, thank you. I think the first thing that I came to my mind now is like identifying yourself as a journey, like who you are. It is a process that it takes time, and appreciating the time is really important, because sometimes we are so in a rush with things, but even then we forget to very slowly see what happened within ourselves, and that's what I also feel. So I identify myself as a Muslim because in Indonesia there are mostly Muslim population, and I was so happy because I started my journey from the searching of my faith, because like the first of all I love to go to Muslim communities at that time. In my first communities, my Muslim communities, what was being taught is about how to be a good woman, and to be a good woman is like you should wear hijab, for example, and also you should obey your fathers, your male person, but then it will comes to the idea of faith, of what we call as iman. So iman means that you believe, but then you don't question at all. Then I compared to other Muslim communities, and I found it very differently. I face a group that see iman in different way. Like when you believe something, then you need to search of that. And it makes me very comfortable at that time, because I joined with this incredible Muslim communities that believe that if you want to believe something, then you need to question it. And that's what the Prophet Muhammad also received. Like the first verse that he received is the first of Iqra, means read, that you have to read. So like imagine at that time that Prophet Muhammad was like cannot read, but then like why the first came with the first verse as that you need to read. Then I reflected in that it is part of your reading yourself, reading your society, reading what happens in your surrounding. So I feel so comfortable in that communities. Then I have figured out that actually there is another perspective of iman. But then it was difficult to talk about sexuality, including about same-sex attraction. And in that space, I felt that I need to continue my journey because it was quite difficult to talk about it. And then I went to the LGBT communities because we have like a very vibrant civil society there. I met LGBT communities and LGBT organizations. But unfortunately, when I came there and discussed about what do you think about religion, what do you think of God, what do you think of Islam, they say that, well, it is a taboo topics. So like, you can discuss about sexuality, about sexual pleasure, about like violence that happened to LGBT people, but then when it comes to the discussion of faith, people kept silent. And I think in that moment, I felt also a little bit different. So like, when I come to the LGBT communities, I found that there is a big discussion about sexuality, which is never been discussed in a mainstream society. But then if we come to the discussion of God, religion, it was so difficult because I realized that there are many religious trauma around that. So then I tried to read. I tried to read books and tried to expanded my mind. That actually there are many terms, many ways how to narrate yourself, how to identify yourself, including when I came to know the term queer. So in that phase, I feel queer means that I can destabilize my identity. So like sometimes when you are so strong in the society that you declare yourself as a person with certain of religion or person with, for example, like say that you are Muslim, then you tend to stabilize it, and then you forget that you are not only Muslim, but also you have another identity as women, as a person who have like many experiences towards your life. And also when it comes to the LGBT, it's also same. It's also happened to the same thing that there is no single version or single narration of how you define yourself as a person who have same sex or you have attraction to same gender, same sex, etc. So in that way, I feel that queer is like a very comfortable way of me to define myself. So I don't have to say that I left my previous experiences as a person, as a Muslim person, because in my Muslim tradition, we are taught to question about everything, including our own identity. So from there, I think that this is a journey that I have as a queer woman, and maybe not all people will recognize or will understand about it, but I think that is a process to informing, to explaining, and then people who wants to listen to our explanation. So that's what I can share to all of you.
Thank you so much for that, Yulia. So we've heard from an ally. We've heard from two incredibly strong women in the Global South who are carving out their own positionalities to create safe spaces for their identities and the people that they work with, the context that they work with. I'm wondering now, from a global North perspective, Reverend Dr. Brent Hawkes, if you can talk about your experiences in terms of how you become a faith leader and where you are right now.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Jen for hosting this panel. I think it's crucially important that this topic be raised. I want to thank the Canadian government for paying my way here. And I do have brochures afterwards if you want to find out more about what I'm doing, and business cards are here at the front. Okay, that's the advertising. I want to begin by challenging a little bit the presupposition for the question. I don't think that spirituality and sexuality are a combustible mix at all. I think that spirituality and sexuality are a perfect mix, a necessary mix. And to be fully healthy and fully whole is about bringing our spirituality and our sexuality together. The combustible part comes from what religion has done, particularly with sexuality. And so many of us who are LGBTQI are forced to choose between our spirituality and our sexuality. We want to become spiritual but not sexual. That works for a little while, until puberty. And then we want to become sexual and not spiritual, and that works for a little while. And so we go back and forth through this challenge. The difficulty is that most religions of the world are not just anti-homosexual, they're anti-sexual. And so most of the religions of the world have a problem with sexuality in general. In the 1970s, the United Church of Canada was asked to do a study on homosexuality. And after 6 months, the committee came back and asked for their mandate to be changed, because they said, we don't just need to study homosexuality, we need to study human sexuality, because the church has a problem with sexuality, period. I was raised a strict fundamentalist Baptist, and in that, growing up that way, I developed a very personal relationship with God. God was my best friend. God and I didn't have a problem. It was the church that I had a problem with. Now, when the church started teaching about how awful homosexuality was, I was thankful, because I found out there were more people in the world just like me, that I wasn't the only one like this, and I wanted to find out, where are they? Tell me where they are so I can find them. I remember, as an example, when I was very, very young, some guys were playing basketball and they were joking about homosexuality. And afterwards, when one of them was playing, I said, what's a homosexual? And he said, go look it up in the dictionary. In those days, we actually had dictionaries that were paper things where you could look up words. And I went and looked up the word homosexual, and the next day he said, did you find it? And I said, yes. It's about two men loving each other, or two women loving each other. And I said, I think that's me. And I remember he picked me up and sat me on a fence post, and he said, that's dirty and that's evil. Don't you ever tell anyone. So as a young person, I began to learn what other people felt about what I felt. And I learned not to trust other people with my feelings, and sometimes not even to trust my own feelings. Eventually, I went on to university. I left the church. My first year of university, went through my wilderness period where I had no church community. Faith communities at their best teach comfort and challenge. They teach comfort in terms of a place where you can comfort each other, be with each other through difficult times, support each other in difficult times, and challenging you to be more open and more loving and more forgiving and more active in the world. And I missed both the comfort and the challenge. Then I met a friend at a gay bar, and he took me eventually to an adult bookstore in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I found a little teeny corner where there was some LGBT material, about one copy of everything, every novel, every book, and every magazine. And I remember sitting out in my little 1972, that ages me, Ford Pinto car, looking through the Advocate, which is the national LGBT magazine in the United States, flipping through it, looking at the pictures, but eventually came to an ad with a cross in it. And I was stunned. And I sat there and cried and cried and cried, because I knew it was home. And it was an ad for the Metropolitan Community Churches found in California in the 60s as a home for LGBT people, where they could be spiritual and sexual and bring their spirituality and their sexuality together. Because we were created as spiritual beings. We were created as sexual beings. And so I moved to Toronto, found my community, and found that amazing, amazing transformative experience of being able to have my sexuality speak to my spirituality, and my spirituality speak to my sexuality, and come together in a healthy way. I believe that my spirituality is God's gift to me, and what I do with my spirituality is my gift back to God.
Thank you so much for that, Reverend Dr. Brent Hawkes. I'm thinking we move to Ankit Bhutani now. Ankit, have you got any thoughts that you want to share from your experiences in Mumbai?
Growing up as a traditional Indian Gujarati person, I remember my mom taking me to temple, and every time she will ask me to perform this one Hindu ritual when we visit temple. And that ritual is, we enter a temple and we go around the deity before we bow down to it. So we enter the temple, go around, look at the deity from different perspective and bow down. Me as a little kid always asked my mom, why do we do that? If we just have to bow down to God, why have to do all this? I have to do exercise before bowing down. My mom was like traditional but not very religious, so she did not give me a perfect answer to that. But growing up gay helped me to reach to the answer to that question. And that is, in Hinduism, we bow down to deity and God after we look at the truth from a different perspective. And it helped me to accommodate my sexuality and spirituality. However, it took me only 40 seconds right now to give you this answer. But in reality, it took over 2 years of struggle. As a teen gay man in Mumbai in India, studied in a regional medium, Gujarati medium school where no English literature was available, my whole world was limited to the limited information shared to us. I remember in 9th standard, 9th grade, in science textbook, we had a chapter on human sexuality, but my teacher, who was a married auntie, a lady, old lady, avoided the whole chapter on human sexuality just because she was uncomfortable talking about sexuality with the students. And end of the day, she was the one who was going to prepare a question set and give the answers to that exam. So I was never taught about sexuality. And being a very good student, quote unquote, I never had resources which was available back at the back benches because my whole world was the first bench of my classroom to my home and back to the same first bench in front of the teacher. When I discovered my sexuality, and I use the word discovered well deliberately because I personally feel and strongly believe that it is something which is always there and one discovers it. So when I discovered my sexuality age of 16, I was shocked, and more than shocked, I was broken because I could not relate to a single story around me. Everything around me were heterosexual. I don't know if they were homosexual or not, but at least they seemed to be heterosexual, and I was the only person. In the whole world, I felt I was completely alone. I tried to kill myself twice because I thought that if somebody else will get to know about my story and who I am, it will be a disgrace to my family, my community, my faith, and so on and so forth. Fortunately, we are a vegetarian family, so the tool I used was a knife. Hardly you can cut a potato or a carrot out of that. Forget about killing a human being. Then I got to know about Mumbai LGBTQ Pride Parade. I decided, okay, let me give a visit to it. But I will not go with these people. I will stand away from it and look at what they are doing. So in 2009, the very first Mumbai LGBTQ Pride Parade was happening. I go there, and with the distance, I look at the people celebrating something, and which led me to a question and a conclusion that if I cannot accept myself for who I am, for the thing these people are celebrating, can I at least continue my life? And if I have to continue my life, I have to find answers to my existence, especially from the thing which I was very closely attached as a child, and that is my faith. And then I started doing my own research on what does my faith has to say about my sexuality. Again, it was an individual, alone journey because there were no resources available. There were nobody available, no gay-friendly temples or organization or gay bar or institutions which were talking about my faith and sexuality. And I did my research, and finally I reached to the truth that the God Almighty has created a diverse world which has place to everyone, including myself. So yeah, here I am. From the 2019, when a kid was afraid to go and visit Mumbai Pride Parade, to today I am one of the co-organizers along with many other people who are organizing Mumbai Pride Parade since last 8 years and have been working on inclusivity at workplace, inclusivity at classrooms, and inclusivity in faith. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Ankit. And I think to round off the discussions on the first questions, I'm going to bring in the second of our allies in this panel, the Honorable Bochra Bel Haj Hamida from Tunisia, to maybe talk a little bit about some of the political implications in her journey as an affirming, politician who works in that space.
Bonjour tout le monde, je vais parler en français. Je pense qu'on ne peut pas être féministe et ne pas défendre. Je crois que je suis venue à défendre les libertés individuelles et notamment le droit, la liberté, la protection des personnes qui sont parfois menacées à cause de leur orientation. Je crois que je suis venue à ça par le féminisme.
So I've come to work on the issues of human rights and human dignity and inclusion from the simple fact of being a woman, being a straight woman, and being a feminist. That's really the lens through which I came into this work.
parce que le féminisme, c'est d'abord la prise de conscience que la société patriarcale veut avoir la main sur le corps des femmes, le contrôle des corps des femmes, mais aussi le pouvoir au sens économique, au sens politique, tous les pouvoirs. Et pour moi, c'est pareil pour les personnes qui sont d'orientation sexuelle, qui est différente de ce qu'on appelle dans nos sociétés la majorité. Donc pour moi, c'est la même chose, c'est cette volonté de la société de contrôler l'être humain et de contrôler son corps et de contrôler toute la société.
And through my work as a feminist and through my research as a feminist, I came to realize the impact of patriarchy. And not only on the relationship between men and women and the supposedly superiority of man, but that deep wish for control of a human being's bodies in society, and including women and including all the LGBTI community as well.
Et je vais vous dire quand même que la première fois où j'ai parlé publiquement de la question des LGBT, c'était en France à l'occasion du Forum social européen, je crois que c'était en 2003, et j'ai parlé au nom des femmes et des hommes qui dans le monde arabe ne pouvaient pas s'exprimer sur cette question, et j'ai été agressée par une partie de la communauté LGBT parce qu'ils m'ont demandé de quel droit vous parlez en leur nom, et non qu'à venir. Alors je leur ai répondu, prière, je vous prie, je vous supplie d'emmener un seul ici parler, parce que vous n'êtes pas conscient de ce qui se passe dans le monde arabe sur cette question.
And the first time I spoke publicly about LGBTI rights was actually in France during a European Social Forum in 2003, if I remember correctly. And I spoke about women's rights, I spoke about LGBTI rights, and I was actually attacked by some members of the LGBTI community in France. And I asked them to open their eyes and understand what was going on in other parts of the world, and that's including in the Arab world.
Et la révolution venue, les personnes et les partis politiques qui sont contre les droits d'une manière générale, les libertés individuelles, ont mobilisé leur masse contre moi, et je me suis retrouvée dans les petits quartiers et dans les villages à être attaquée parce que moi, j'étais celle qui veut le mariage gay.
And my struggle continued as a defender of human rights when I got back to Tunisia and during the revolution. And I faced huge amounts of repression and attacks and harassment from local groups, local political groups, who undermined my work and attacked my work for promoting women's rights, human rights and LGBTI rights in Tunisia.
Mais quelques mois après, et là je dis que c'est grâce à la révolution, c'est quelques mois, je dirais une année après, la Tunisie a vraiment changé. En 2012, on a vu des ONG, des LGBT, on a vu et on a une radio, on a des romans qui s'écrivent dans la langue tunisienne, avec le dialecte tunisien, des histoires tunisiennes, des personnes qui sont LGBT. Donc c'est quelque chose d'extraordinaire qui se passe en Tunisie, même si la loi n'a pas changé, même s'il y a aujourd'hui encore des personnes, et notamment des jeunes, qui vont en prison, parce que la loi, elle prévoit la prison pour les personnes homosexuelles, femmes ou hommes, mais quand même, la parole s'est libérée, et aujourd'hui, les organisations sont là, elles s'organisent, elles défendent, et vraiment, elles sont visibles.
And I have to tell you that the situation in Tunisia is really evolving, and evolving in a good way. And we faced huge amount of struggle during the revolution, but this has opened the box. Now we can actually talk about human rights, we can talk about LGBTI rights, we can talk about women's rights. And the situation is not easy, it's not clear-cut, but now there are organizations, there are NGOs, there is freedom of speech. The law is still rather discriminatory, but in the facts, in social norms, things are really evolving.
Vous aurez pu inviter une des associations, mais là je suis là parce que je suis la présidente d'une commission dont je vous parlerai tout à l'heure, qui a justement proposé l'abrogation de cet article qui prévoit la prison. Donc je vous en parlerai plus tard.
And we could have invited an NGO here, a Tunisian NGO here on the panel, but we invited Bosha so that she could also share her political experience and her experience in a committee on human rights that she'll talk about a little bit later.
Thank you very much for that, Honourable Bosha. So I'm going to now ask the second question, and I'm mindful of our time because there are some people already standing outside wanting to come into this space for their 4 p.m. session. But we've spoken about the general journey of how it got you into here, but this is the crux of the session now about faith, right? This is where you all get to share with us the core of your theological knowledge and how that is affirming of gender diverse and LGBTI identities in your space where you stand. So I'm wondering if we could start with one of our allies, Father Thomas, if you can just maybe, I'm thinking maybe 2 to 3 minutes, if we could, for this one, because, yeah.
Okay, let me try. One of the challenges that comes in the space of understanding diverse sexuality and gender identities as a Christian is to understand who the loving God is while there are judgmental passages in the Bible that one perceives that God is actually trying to separate and identify a certain group of people because of their sexual identity and gender identities. Well, one of my favorite psalms in the Bible is Psalm 139. And I found my answer in Psalm 139, verse 14, which says, I praise you, God, because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And that made more sense to me than trying to understand binary formulas that comes out in the first book of Genesis. And so, theologically speaking, I had to understand God's love as a God who made each of us human beings in His divine image as unique beings. And sexuality is not something that was not in His plans. The whole aspect of sexuality and gender identities gave uniqueness to each human being in this world. And that's why I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. In the Orthodox faith, we believe in the Trinitarian theology, where God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit are so intimately attached, and the church as the bride is asked to follow the Trinitarian faith. What does that mean? That we follow the love of God as God practiced the love in the Holy Trinity. As a community of faithful beings, we practice a love that is so intimately involved that we accept each other as the divine beings created in the image of God. And so we give emphasis to that divinity that is there in each of us as human beings, as God would have given it to each human being. Sexuality and gender identities is not something outside. It's inside that plan of God. And so it's in that respect that I found joy in celebrating the Trinitarian faith, in being able to recognize the holiness and divinity that is there in each human being with their sexuality, with their gender identity.
Thank you very much for that, Father Thomas. Reverend Nokuthula, would you care to share with us the core of your theological knowledge and also how affirming it is of gender diverse and LGBTI identities in your space in Soweto, in South Africa?
Okay. I am a spirit, live in a body and a soul, and sexuality formed a little part of who I am, not everything. So in my personal theological journey in finding, rereading the scriptures in my own little corner, when I realized that, I needed to find God that is loving. So I identify with God because I am created by the image of God, meaning that I have a spirit and I have a body and I have a soul, and I am not different from any other person. So rereading the scripture, finding myself into the scripture, that Psalms 21 that says that God created the whole world and God created all of us in a different ways. Scriptures like Jeremiah, when God said, I knew you before you were born. Those were the scriptures that I had to reread and find it and find myself into being part of the creation of the image of God. And it has been, when we have these conversations with other theologians or even including other religious leaders, I always say that God had a sense of humor. Because when you look at each and every one of us inside this room, we are so different. Others are tall, others are blessed like me. I have a gray hair. Others have beautiful smile, small eyes, and dark colors, long hair, short hair, and everything like that. So meaning that I had to find myself in those, in the sense of how God has humor, in a way that I am part of the creation, and I should feel proud and not allow anyone to tell me otherwise. Because, as Father Thomas is saying, that I am also beautifully and wonderfully made in the image of God. So that was my theological interpretation into how I integrated my own sexuality and my spirituality, and finding joys into looking at how animals look like, how we human beings look like, how everything else is so different, in a sense that it makes us to feel that we are so excitedly and we are so wonderfully made. And each and every time when I have conversations with LGBTI people, realizing that, some face so many challenges into understanding and integrating their own sexuality and their spirituality, because of the fact that, the church has been sending the message of hate excluding LGBTI people into thinking that they are not part of the human being, or they are not part of the creation of God. So that is what I can really say about my own theological journey.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Reverend Nokuthula. Julia, do you want to talk a little bit about your theological background and also, affirming different identities and gender diverse and LGBTI in Indonesia and the work that you do? But also it would be really interesting to hear about the community that you work in, and one of the things that we want to hear as well, which I'll circle back to Father Thomas and Nokuthula, is, examples of affirming faith communities in your context, in your region.
Yeah, I want to start by saying that the passionate of ourselves to the God in Quranic verses called taqwa. And there is the verse that's saying that, actually it is very clear, I think, that the one that distinguishes between human being is taqwa. So that's all. So they don't say any word about it is because of your gender, your sexuality, and this is what one of the Muslim religious leader also put in a frame, that there is a universal verses that is distributed in the Quran that's saying about the universal ideas about humanity. And if you want to go to the core of the idea of taqwa, then it's not about the fearing God itself, but from the context of what the Prophet Muhammad was, that there was a Jahilian society, like people just did like severe act, for example, like about the how women were treated at that time, and that you can just like marry women wherever you want without a certain procedures, and like there was a very bad society at that time. And when the idea of taqwa came, then it tried to reveal the context that actually you cannot differentiate between that you are women, you are men at that time, because as long as you have this idea of taqwa, then that's what matters. Now, and I think it's also including with the diverse gender and sexuality as well. And I think back to the context at that time, there was many oppression during that time in Arabic society at that time. And I think the idea of the Islam is trying to deconstruct what happened in the society. And because we have the idea also about the Rahmatan lil Alamin, that actually that Islam should be should be like a bless for the universe itself. So the concept of Rahmatan lil Alamin should be also seen as a part of the taqwa itself. So I want to say that from the very like immateriality, it comes to the anthropocentric idea of religion, of the faith. And I think when it comes to the very idea of the humanity, then our embodiment experience should be counted. And that's what I also learned about from the feminist Muslim perspective, that our body is being contested and being the arena of the systematic oppression of the society or state or even religious institution. And I think the idea to try to see that, to deconstruct this, try to see that the oppression is there, is part of the obligation of the Muslim, because they are the first saying that we are Khalifah, we are the moral agent. So we try to shift the oppressive society into the more to a more like humanitarian. Human is the idea of the religion itself and the idea of the taqwa itself. And I think about the affirming religion or affirming a religious community, like at least in 2008, there is what we call as Pesantren Waria, or Islamic boarding school for the trans women, that has existed in Yogyakarta, Indonesia since 2008. And unfortunately, because of the high political attention, then it was being shut down. But at that time, so the Pesantren was very, very located near the villages. So people know exactly who they are, what they do, and there are so many. There are also some religious leaders that try to give the information about how to do the teaching, how to read Quran, how to practice religion, because you can then decide whether you want to wear the female outfits or the male outfits, because like there is still a segregation, right? When you comes to in Islam, when you comes to the mandate of the salat, of the praying. And I think that's what I also reflected from my journey in my community, because I also initiate an organization called YIFOS, Youth Interfaith Forum on Sexuality. So we built the concept of queer camp. So we want to make people come together, participants from diverse faith and sexual identity, and then peace activists, LGBT activists, and also religious scholars to talk about this issue together. And we figure out that because we start with the term queer, then we try not to define what people identity at that time. Of course, there are LGBT identified person, but there are also person who are not identified as LGBT but do the same-sex practices. For example, like Mairil, it is like the same-sex practices appear in the some of the Islamic boarding school, and also another cultural identity called, for example, like we have like 5 gender in Indonesia, and the last gender is called like bisu, and bisu is one of the one of the religious leader in a pre-traditional cultural practices in one of the place in South Sulawesi. So I think there are many ideas about the word of affirming religion, affirming LGBT, so-called LGBTIQ in the society, but we need to see deeper first and try to be very clear about what we want to address, because like when we already have the presumption in our head, then we will think that okay, I want to see like whether there is LGBT person or not, whether there is like the people with religion or not, but actually we have so diverse experiences in the life itself.
Thank you so much for that, Yulia. Reverend Dr. Brent Hawkes, do you want to hit us with some, incredible theological affirming knowledge for LGBTI and gender diverse identities, and also be interesting to hear about some examples of affirming faith communities in your context?
The challenge that most of the world's religions have is we're dealing with sacred documents that were written thousands of years ago. And if you can imagine the medical community, if they took medical documents from 2,000 years ago and wanted to use those documents as rule books for how to do medicine today, how they would be in trouble. Or if the legal community took legal documents from 2,000 years ago and wanted to use those as rule books, thank you, for how to do the legal community today. So that's the challenge we face as religious communities. If we took our sacred documents, and I love the Bible, however, if we treat it as a history book, as the history of the early people of faith and how they wrestled with the questions that we wrestle with, and where they got it right, and frankly, where they got it wrong. The challenge has been when we try to take the document like the Bible and use it as a rule book, because you can find things in the Bible to support and to challenge for and against almost everything that you can think of. But you can also find wonderful stories, love stories about Jonathan and David, or love stories about Ruth and Naomi that are also in the Bible. Whenever the religious right are able to frame an argument, God versus gays, we lose the argument, and it drives more and more LGBT people away from religious communities. So it's very important to lift up the positive examples, not only in Scripture, but also to lift up the positive examples of faith communities around the world. In Canada, we have the United Church of Canada, which is the largest Protestant denomination in our country that is fully affirming, welcoming of LGBT people, ordaining of openly gay people, supporting gay marriage. The Anglican Church in Canada is moving also in that direction. The Presbyterian Church in Canada just approved becoming fully affirming in Canada. We have the liberal rabbis in terms of Reform Judaism that are unbelievably accepting in Canada, and we have the Unitarian Church in Canada that is fully accepting all Unitarian congregations that had to go through an affirming process. The key to this is having a process where local faith communities can wrestle with the issue in those local faith communities, and when that happens, you see the communities change.
Thank you so much for that. Ankit, I'm wondering if you can add, as a person of faith, in your context and your theology, and also, some examples of like LGBTI and gender diverse affirming work around your context.
Sure, thank you. So as I started my first answer to my first question with the example of Pradakshina, I'm going to continue with that, and that when you enter the temple, when you look at the truth from a multiple perspective, we are receptive and understand that there is not only one truth. The truth can be seen and understand, accommodated from a different perspective. If I'm not able to understand your perspective, maybe we are standing at a different point of view, looking at the same truth. So this is for the crux or small one-liner about Hinduism is what I would like to present. Hinduism primarily divides all human acts into 4 categories. First is dharma, loosely can be translated into responsibilities. Artha, which is act related to wealth generation and prosperity. Third, kama purushartha, acts related to desire. And fourth, moksha, acts related to liberation. So as you can see, the religion as Hinduism has all 4 dimensions. It does not go away from the kama purushartha, the acts related to desire, which includes sexual desire, which of course includes homosexuality, heterosexuality, and everything in between. And that is why we have religious text, repeating it, religious text talking about human sexuality. Not just that, religious text talking about how you can have an amazing sex. Kama Sutra is very well known for it, or temple walls of our temples are very well known around the world for it, and we get lots of tourism for that. Thank you, God. But what happens is that at the end, when the dharma purushartha or a moksha purushartha, that means the act of duty and when act of liberation dominates, the desire and wealth generation, human experience are neglected. So we need to understand when we talk about Hinduism that there is a complete inclusivity of all human experience from the faith point of view. And that is the truth which I reached to after my research. And from the ancient Sanskrit text, today in English we just have few limited words, my dear, like gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, and like few more. Not more than 100 for sure for human sexuality, right? I have more than 69, actually 67, but just to give a funk, I gave it 69. 69 Sanskrit word from Indian original text dating back to 2nd century BCE, 3rd century BCE. Various type of human sexual expressions, queer identity and queer sexuality mentioned in Indian text. It's just that nobody talks about it. We need to talk about it. So at the end, I would say that what is Hinduism in one line? Because we do not have a one God, one text, one religious leader, I would like to say that if you ask 100 practicing Hindu, what is Hinduism for you? Combination of all their answers is what Hinduism is all about. We just celebrated International Day of Yoga, and I want to thank the whole community at UN for making that possible. And then we had one of our very well-known spiritual leaders, Sadhguru Jaggi Vasudev Ji from India at the UN on World International Day of Yoga. And he importantly talked about yoga of inclusivity. We have various Hindu faith leaders like His Holiness Sri Sri Ravi Shankar Ji of Art of Living Foundation, which has presence in over 150 countries, changed their all social media profile pictures in the rainbow color to celebrate the Pride Month. So these are the inclusive faith leaders talking about inclusivity and faith in India, and I'm proud to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I think it's towards the end of our comments now from the panelists before we open it up to some statements from states and also some questions. I'm wondering if we can now ask the second of our allies on the panel, the Honorable Bourgeois, to finish off the conversation around, affirming political actions, that accept gender diverse and LGBTI identities.
En fait, avant la Révolution, la question des libertés individuelles était absente des débats, notamment dans le mouvement des droits de l'homme. Parce qu'à l'époque, c'était la priorité, c'est les libertés politiques, c'est le droit de s'exprimer, etc. Venue la Révolution, les nouvelles associations, la question des libertés individuelles a été inscrite dans la Constitution. Aujourd'hui, la Constitution oblige l'État à protéger les libertés individuelles comme les libertés publiques.
So before the revolution in Tunisia, the focus was very much on freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. And with the revolution came the concept of individual rights, and this was inscribed in the Constitution. And so today what is written in the Constitution is a legal and political commitment to protecting individual rights in the country.
Et quand le président de la République a nommé la commission que j'ai présidée et nous a demandé de présenter des réformes sur la question des libertés individuelles, c'est-à-dire la garantie des libertés individuelles, et de l'égalité. Bien sûr, une des questions, c'était l'article 230, lequel pénalise l'homosexualité.
And so Boshra was appointed by the government to be president of a commission on individual rights.
La représentante de la République a nommé la commission.
So Boshra was appointed by the president of Tunisia on a commission on individual freedoms and equality. And that commission was appointed to look into individual rights and the respect of individual rights in Tunisia. So as they were debating and discussing, the issue of Article 230 on criminalization of homosexuality came up. So the commission took some time to discuss the issue between them.
Donc nous avons présenté le rapport de la COLIB, parce qu'on appelle la commission la COLIB, et nous avons mis l'accent sur, bien sûr, les droits humains, sur les traités internationaux, sur la Constitution, mais aussi on a introduit aussi la question de l'abrogation de cet article par la religion. Je ne sais pas si j'ai le temps de développer quelques arguments, mais je dirais d'abord, il y a des crimes qui sont sanctionnés par le Coran. On dit l'adultère, il y a telle sanction. Le vol, il faut couper la main. On tue, il faut couper la tête. Mais l'islam et le Coran parlent de l'homosexualité comme quelque chose qui est dégoûtante pour le Coran, mais il n'y a pas de sanction. Donc on leur dit, il n'y a pas de sanction. Pourquoi vous mettez une sanction? Deuxième chose, pardon.
Sorry to interrupt. So when the Commission looked into individual rights and the protection of individual rights and looked at the criminalization of homosexuality, not only did they look at legal frameworks, international legal frameworks, but they also looked into the Quran and into religious argumentations. And they worked with theologians in Tunisia to find arguments against the criminalization of homosexuality. And the Quran is full of sanctions against adultery, against spying on your neighbor, but actually in terms of homosexuality, no sanction is provided for in the Quran.
Donc l'origine de la pénalisation, ce n'est pas l'islam, c'est le protectorat ou le colonialisme français. Ce sont les Français, quand ils sont venus en Tunisie, pour bien sûr nous coloniser, pour eux c'est un peuple de barbares, de sauvages, etc. Donc ils ont introduit la pénalisation de l'homosexualité. Et ça on leur dit, parce qu'on trouve qu'on a souvent invoqué l'identité pour justement avoir ce genre de loi répressive. Alors nous, on leur dit au contraire, c'est notre identité qui refuse que le colonialisme pénalise l'homosexualité alors qu'elle n'était pas pénalisée avant l'arrivée des Français.
And when we look at the origins of criminalization of homosexuality in Tunisia, it's actually not faith-based. It's not written in the Quran, but it stems from the French protectorate. And that's when criminalization came up. And that's really what we brought forward to the government through the commission, revealing that it's not an issue of local culture and local traditional values, but actually it comes from the outside and it comes from a foreign state.
Le troisième argument, c'est que dans l'islam, il est interdit d'espionner les gens. Et d'ailleurs, je vais finir par une petite histoire. Le califat Omar, a entendu du bruit. Il est entré chez les voisins, il a trouvé une femme et un homme en train de faire l'amour et de boire du vin. Il leur a dit, voilà, vous avez commis un péché. Et le monsieur dit au calife, vous en avez commis 3. Vous êtes rentré chez moi sans mon autorisation, vous êtes rentré chez moi sans me saluer, et vous êtes rentré chez moi pour m'espionner. Et donc vous avez fait 3 péchés. Et le califat lui a dit, vous avez raison, vous êtes pardonné.
And Boshra ends up with a little story that comes from the Quran. And she talks of the story, and that's something.
C'est le califat, c'est lui qui est venu, voilà. Le prophète et un autre, c'est le deuxième califat, le calife.
And that's the commission brought that forward to the government, saying that if we're going to look at the Quran, we have to look at it carefully. And actually, let's look at this story where the Caliph Omar went into someone's home because he was hearing some things, and adultery was happening, and he said, you're not allowed to do this. And actually the owner of the house said, well, actually, you've committed 3 crimes, according to the Quran. You came into my home without my authorization. You spied on me. And you didn't even say hello to me. And these are 3 sins according to the Quran.
So thank you very much for that to all our panels. I'm going to open the floor now to some questions. But first of all, I want to call on the government or the representative of Canada to deliver their statement.
Thank you very much. Canada is pleased to co-sponsor today's timely event. And the intersection between the right of freedom of religion and belief and LGBTI rights are largely presumed to be unharmonious. So I thank you today for reaffirming that they are in fact intimately linked and mutually reinforcing. Canada acknowledges and applauds the efforts within faith-based communities and people like yourselves who are helping to advance the right of LGBTI persons and inclusive religious understandings and interpretation. Change will not happen overnight. However, through the formation of alliances and courageous leadership of faith-based actors, together we can forge a path that promotes equality and dignity for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also want to call on the representative from the state of Sweden who wishes to make a statement at this stage.
Thank you so much for this great panel. And as Reverend Lala, I think, said, God has humor, but this panel also has been very humoristic, though we have dealt with a very serious issue. And as my colleague from Canada said, the conversation today comes in very timely, as we all know, because we are about in the Human Rights Council to renew the mandate of the independent expert on sexual orientation and abuse, and this is not easily done. We need all your support. I think you have portrayed very well how religion can be good, but also can be used to resist calls for protection of LGBTQI persons' rights, and even to justify violations of international and constitutional rights and equality. And I think you've given some wonderful phrases to us to use to counter this backward view of humanity and rights. And you've also shown in a wonderful way how religious leaders and actors play a key role in shaping people's values, norms, and norms of acceptable behavior and life roles. I think Father Ninam, but all of you gave really good testimony of this, how you yourself can change. My own country, Sweden, has gone through a development, and it is only in 2009 the Church of Sweden began to conduct marriages also for same-sex and allowing Christian and same-sex couples to get married within their faith tradition, while acquiring a legal status that gives them access to the social protection of married couples. Maybe if you have any messages to us while we are preparing to renew the mandate of the Special Representative Sorgi that we can pick up, I would love to hear. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'll call on the representative from Uruguay, who is one of our co-sponsors for this event, to make a statement.
I would like to thank faith leaders and faith workers for sharing your personal experiences and views, and for your valuable contribution to have a more inclusive society. Also, I would like to thank Government of Canada for sponsoring this side event, and also thank activists, leaders, organizations, coalitions for your collaboration, and all of you for being here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. I want to also, I think the government of Israel is here and they would like to make a statement.
Yes, first of all, I want to thank all the panelists for so many uplifting and interesting stories and personal experiences emanating from so many different cultures and religions. That's really, really enriching, and all these testimonies enrich, I think, not only religious communities themselves, but also the LGBT cause. And I want to give an example about this conflict of identities that religious LGBT people go through something that was verified in Israel. You know, in Israel we have these two cities with very particular identities, Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Tel Aviv is this secular liberal beacon, and Jerusalem is thought of as a very conservative, religious space. And also in Judaism, as in many of the faiths here represented, there are many attempts to reinterpret and to bring and to propose more inclusive theologies that allow for the embracing of LGBT people. First of all, we could think of the saying of "love your neighbor as thyself" as could be emphasized as a much more important quote than many other that criminalize LGBT and non-normative sexual behavior, as we could say. But as in Israel, this movement increases of religious Jews who discover their sexuality and seek for places to be included. The LGBT religious people have a harder time being included in the Tel Aviv LGBT community, where LGBT people conform to a certain standard of LGBT behavior. There's even said to be a kind of a patriarchy inside the LGBT movement. So it's interesting to see that for a religious person, LGBT person in Israel, perhaps it's easier to get integrated in the Jerusalem community, which is much smaller but still more open to this diversity. So I think, just to conclude, that an LGBT religious person should never have to choose between these two important aspects of their identity, and spirituality is very important itself. And just to thank you for bringing this other voice to all these aspects of the cause. I think what you're doing here is a real, as we say in Hebrew, a Kiddush Hashem, a sanctification of the name of God. Thank you so much.
And finally, the home of the Global Interfaith Network is based in South Africa, in Johannesburg. We'd like to give the opportunity to the representative from South Africa to please make a statement.
Thank you very much, Madam Program Director. It's a privilege for me to have been part of this. Please accept my apology in the delay in us conveying our co-sponsorship of this, but we're going to use that for next year because this must happen again next year. If not in between, that we find a way in which we carry this energy forward to continue the conversation. So you have our full support. I am fiercely, beautifully made in the image of God. I love that. And how do we convey this message to ensure that we are able to achieve precisely the progress that we want to achieve in inclusion, critical to which is addressing discrimination and violence and all the things that go into that. So to the independent expert, to Andre, I think maybe we should think between now how we use the momentum of this to go beyond people who are agreed, who are of common mind, to get those that have their own fears, those that have their own constraints, where politically, globally, the environment is not healthy. I believe it's in these spaces that we can create that. So what do we do in September? Outside of the council, parallel, in tandem to the council, what do we do in March? What do we do in June to keep the conversation going? I was saying to the independent expert, I had an experience that for me makes it imperative that faith is brought into this, or spirituality is brought into this. I was in exile with a fellow comrade at a most prestigious university. We fought apartheid, both of us. But he could never tell me who he was or who she was. She was compelled to hide it forever. Looking back, I cannot imagine the fear that he lived in. And to compel a person to live in a constant state of fear that if I were known to be who I am fiercely and beautifully made in the image of God. The world will collapse. She went back to South Africa and openly led as a transgender woman. However, the world wasn't prepared for that, and tragic consequences ensued. She died. So for me, in honor of Sally Gross, my dear friend, at a personal level, it's important that this conversation continues. So I thank you. I thank you all for the privilege of being here. Thanks.
So our time is up. I want to encourage all of you to continue these conversations with these incredible activists. Outside, you can ask them personal questions. You can ask them whatever it is that you want to ask. It doesn't have to be in here. If you're shy, you can find them somewhere in a corner in the cafeteria and sit down and have a conversation with them. But I want to reiterate and I want to thank the countries of Canada and Uruguay for allowing us this opportunity to have this event here today. I also want to thank our organizational sponsors who we read out earlier. But most of all, I want to thank our panelists for contributing their time and their efforts. Not just as faith leaders, but as people of faith and allies in this struggle. But maybe as a final word from our panelists, can I just hand it over to Reverend Brent Hawkes, who will, I'm so sorry to put you on the spot, but can you just sum it up in one sentence or just final phrase to close off our space?
Sure, I would say particularly to the embassies, that when you are having pride receptions, when you're having different gatherings, reach out particularly to LGBT people of faith and invite them into the discussion so that faith, which has created a lot of the problem, can now help to create the solution. So inviting faith communities in, and I have brochures and business cards if anybody wants them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much for your attendance.